Hey there. Help you?
What state is this?
Sorry.
You don't understand the question?
Oh, no, I didn't. Most people know where they are.
Why ain't most people?
You're in the glorious state of Arkansas, sweetheart.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Matthew Kadish here, author of the Earthman Jack Space Saga, available over on Amazon.com. And today I'm coming at you with some movie news about a film which is surprisingly controversial. Some of you may have heard of it, most of you probably haven't. It's a film called The Hunt. And it's a low-budget kind of horror film being, or at least it was going to be, distributed by Universal Studios. And it's a film that has garnered a little bit of controversy lately in the political arena because it's basically about a group of global elites who kidnap quote-unquote deplorables, otherwise known as Republicans or, Trump supporters or, right-leaning individuals, and basically throws them into a arena-type scenario and hunts them down. And so a lot of the news stations kind of picked up on this, and it was kind of a minor story in the news cycle until, I guess, President Trump himself tweeted out something about this movie, and then it got a little bit of broader attention. And then there were two mass shootings that happened, one in El Paso, Texas, and one in Dayton, Ohio, very tragic events. And because of all the mass shootings and controversy surrounding this film, Universal ultimately decided to pull this film from its release slate. And the reason I find this interesting is it's actually interesting on many different issues, which we're going to get into in this video. But first of all, I just want to say that this movie, it's kind of surprising because it doesn't look like it's all that controversial, at least from the trailer. Like when I saw the trailer, I actually thought the movie looked pretty good. And the whole thing about it being anti-Republican, anti-right-leaning, or what have you, I'm not quite sure I agree with it because the people who are being hunted by the global elites in the movie eventually turn the tables and, fight back. And I can only assume that they win and survive or something like that. So it doesn't really seem to take a side. It's just kind of like the premise of the movie is, something that has been done many, many different times before. Going all the way back to The Deadliest Game, which was, I believe, a book that was eventually turned into a movie. And that's about, hunting the most dangerous game, which is, of course, man. And since then, we've had numerous types of variation on that, tried and true storytelling theme with movies like, for instance, The Hunger Games or Battle Royale. Films like that, which have, been around and been popular and haven't really been all that controversial. I mean, controversial in the sense that they were extremely violent, but audiences seem to be perfectly okay with them. So what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to break down what's going on and what the broader impact of this decision by Universal could be. So we're going to get into a little bit of inside baseball with the studio system and politics and how this could affect future movies. So if we head on over to this article on CNBC, we'll see that the big headline is Universal cancels The Hunt release after mass shootings in Ohio and Texas. So we'll see here, this article, by the way, it is written by Sarah Whitten. And she starts it off by saying, Universal Pictures has canceled the release of The Hunt after shooting massacres in Ohio and Texas last weekend killed 31 people and wounded dozens of others. The film, which Universal has called a satirical social thriller, is about a group of globalist elites who pay large amounts of money to hunt people for sport. Their game gets turned on its head when the hunted become the hunters. The film was due to hit theaters on September 27th. While Universal Pictures had already paused the marketing campaign for The Hunt after thoughtful consideration, the studio has decided to cancel our plans to release the film, the company said in a statement. We stand by our filmmakers and will continue to distribute films in partnership with bold and visionary creators like those associated with this satirical social thriller, but we understand that now is not the right time to release this film. It is unclear if the company will release the film at a later date as part of its upcoming streaming service or if the film will remain shelved indefinitely. The film had an estimated budget of just under $20 million and was produced by Blumhouse. Blumhouse is best known for taking small budget films and turning them into huge box office successes. The studio has produced hits like Paranormal Activity and the Academy Award-winning Get Out. Universal's cancellation of the release date for The Hunt comes just days after Walmart decided to remove video game signage and displays from its stores that depicted violent gaming. While it has long been argued that violent video games and violent movies cause people to become violent, there's no scientific evidence to back up that claim, experts say. It is likely that both Walmart and Universal have made these decisions not as a condemnation of the products themselves, but as a way of not upsetting customers and moviegoers in the wake of these horrific acts of violence. Studios and TV production companies have often altered their slate due to incidents of mass shootings. Episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Hannibal, Friends, Castle, and Mr. Robot, among numerous others, have had episodes pulled from air because of violent acts in the news. Now, something interesting about this is that right now Universal has a movie out in theaters called Hobbs and Shah, which has way more gun violence in it than it looked like this movie did. And they're not pulling that from theaters, of course, because Hobbs and Shah is a major summer blockbuster tentpole movie, which is meant to spin off a new franchise from one of Universal's only remaining successful franchises, which is, of course, the Fast and Furious series. The interesting thing about The Hunt is that it's a very low-budget movie. It cost about $20 million to make. And so Universal doesn't have a whole lot riding on it, so they can afford to kind of pull it from theaters right now. I do find the timing of this interesting, though, because the movie isn't set to come out till late September. And so a lot of the marketing was kind of ramping up for it here in August. And what Universal could have done is just, paused the marketing a bit and waited it out and released it in its September release window once all the furor over these tragic shootings had died down. However, I think that it wasn't necessarily the shootings which were a deciding factor in Universal pulling this movie. I think it was a lot of the controversy that was being stirred up because basically no one had really heard of this movie before. And Blumhouse, they kind of specialize in these like micro budget films that they can, make huge profits on. And Universal has always been the horror studio. It's the studio that, kind of made its bones on classic horror movies. And Blumhouse made a deal with Universal, a big picture deal. So like for the last, decade or so, they've been making horror movies for Universal, which have been hugely profitable for the studio. And so this movie was actually conceived as a possible franchise in much the same way that a movie like The Purge was. So The Purge was one of Blumhouse's and Universal's big, horror franchises where, it was made for a really small amount of money. I think the first Purge was made for like $3 million and it made like a ton of money at the box office. So hugely profitable films. And Blumhouse is looking to create, franchises of these, kind of low budget horror movies that Universal can just, milk the crap out of and get all that sweet, sweet franchise money from it. And so I looked at The Hunt as just another kind of movie much in the same vein as The Purge, because The Purge has kind of a political bent to it, but it's not like a preachy political bent where they're pushing one type of politics over another. The politics is just a vehicle by which to justify the movie's premise. And the same can be said for The Hunt, where you have this premise of, a group of global elites who kidnap people and then hunt them. And the people who are being hunted have to fight back in order to survive. That's a great horror, premise right there. But it looked like, Blumhouse had planned to have like a whole franchise based on this, where The Hunt 2, it's a new group of people that are being hunted, and so on and so forth, much like The Purge. So, obviously that was kind of Universal's thinking in this, and the whole, deplorables versus liberals thing seems to have come out of nowhere, but there might actually be something to that, considering that the people who were in charge of developing and writing The Hunt are people you may recognize in terms of Damon Lindelof and Nick Coos. Now, you might recognize Lindelof and Coos from their work on Lost. However, it was a different Coos. It was Carlton Coos, who is I believe he used to be an executive over at ABC, and now he's a producer and a writer in his own right. But Lost was his first show that he was an executive producer / showrunner on, alongside Damon Lindelof, who came from the J.J. Abrams Bad Robot school of writing and stuff like that. And after parting ways with Carlton Coos, Lindelof has actually teamed up and partnered with his son, Nicholas Coos, who he's done other projects with, such as the Leftovers on HBO, and his new project, which is Watchmen, which Nick Coos is also working on. So this movie, The Hunt, it was basically a project that Lindelof and Coos worked on together. And if you've been following my coverage of Watchmen and, looking at the trailers and some of the news stories, you know that Damon Lindelof is not shy about, his politics. And it's obvious that he's kind of working in some allegories into Watchmen where, the bad guys are kind of alt-writers and stuff like that. And so I think a lot of people who were aware of Lindelof's political biases kind of read into The Hunt a little bit more than they probably should have. And that's one of the reasons why people are thinking that this is a very political movie, when I think it's more just like, here's a stupid premise for a horror movie. Yeah, there's some political background to it, but who cares? It's about people being hunted. But I also think, from what I've heard, and I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but the people who were chosen to be hunted in the movie The Hunt were chosen because they were like pro-lifers or, anti-abortion activists or something. And that was another kind of trigger for people to kind of hop on the political bandwagon and talk about outrage for this. Now, in terms of Universal pulling its support for this movie, its release date, it's kind of interesting because, first of all, September is a graveyard for movies. Typically what happens is studios do what's called the August dump, where they dump all of their kind of, lesser anticipated films towards the end of October and into September. And September is kind of like the graveyard before the holiday season starts, where you have, at the end of October, you get some scary movies out there for Halloween. And then November is the big holiday season where they start releasing some of their blockbusters and awards contenders going into December, where people are going to be home for the holidays and they go check out movies. So September is kind of like the no man's land for new releases, where the studios just put out stuff that is either low budget or not expected to do so well. And that was the original release date for The Hunt. And the idea that they're pulling it now is probably because they realized that they had to either pause the marketing campaign for it, because, in August leading up to September, you want to get the trailers out there and you want to start buying commercial space and stuff like that. But they had already Universal had already suspended their advertising for this film in the lead up to its release in September, and in the wake of these terrible shootings. But in addition to that, I think that they were more concerned not necessarily about the gun violence in the film, because if you watch the trailer, it's not just guns. They're, using bows and arrows and knives and samurai swords and stuff like that. So it's not strictly a gun movie. I think a lot of this was kind of driven by the fact that it got political. And in a weird way, that actually works to the movie's favor because it's getting a ton of free publicity. Like, you didn't hear about this movie in the lead up to the release of the trailer. And even after the trailer came out this month, there wasn't a whole lot of buzz about this film. I mean, it's a very low budget film. There are no major names in it. I think Hilary Swank is probably the most recognizable name on there, but you also have, a few TV actors who are kind of headlining this thing that you might recognize their faces, but you certainly don't know their names. So it wasn't like a big movie that a lot of people were looking forward to. It was just kind of like a one-off release that could potentially launch a new franchise for Universal, a low-budget horror franchise. And so the sudden political attention on this is actually elevated its profile a great deal. And I think Universal got scared by that, and so they were looking for something to justify, pulling the movie until the controversy settled down. And obviously, the tragic events in Ohio and Texas gave them the excuse that they wanted to pull this film. And I think they're being a little bit insincere in saying that it's in reaction to these shootings, because Hollywood does this all the time, where a tragic event happens and there's something in a upcoming release that has to that could possibly trigger people or be seen as disrespectful, and so they either change it or they pull it or what have you. And then long after that, the feelings over that tragedy have passed, the product, the artwork, is irreparably harmed. You can never go back to it. I remember there was an issue where around the time 9/11 happened, the show 24 had an episode where a plane blew up. And so they actually had to go back in and recut that episode, and kind of, you hear the explosion, but you never see the plane blowing up. And it was really poorly done. And actually a lot of that footage was in the commercials for that episode. And so, whenever Hollywood is kind of reactionary, I never think it's a good idea to do that. I always think that, you made an artistic choice, stick to your guns. People will understand, despite the tragedy. Now, I could be wrong on that, but I tend to think that, over time, people heal, memories fade, but art is forever. And so, if you make an artistic choice, it's best to stick to it. And with what's going on here with Universal, there's a good chance that this movie might never see the light of day. It might be one of those things that Universal decides to just put on the shelf and let collect dust, or they might choose to release it as an original film on streaming or something like that. But the fact that it was slated for a theatrical release and has now been pulled is quite surprising to me, because basically, these films are scheduled, months, sometimes years in advance. And there's now a gap in that release schedule. And exhibitors are probably not going to be happy about that, because they had those theaters reserved for that film. Even though it was probably not going to be a huge release, they now have to find a substitute for that inventory, which was originally scheduled for Universal. So I'm not sure how the theatrical deals work on this, but Universal might be taking a financial hit by pulling this movie. And so I'm wondering what the real motivation is behind pulling this, because obviously you don't see a lot of other studios pulling their violent action movies from theaters in response to mass shootings. But for some reason, this one did. And I think it has more to do with the political scrutiny that was coming under than it did with the mass shootings. And the reason for that, I believe, is because Universal and Blumhouse don't want to make it seem like they are advocating violence against, people because of their political beliefs. And they don't want to alienate audiences who might, have a certain political leaning from going and seeing their movies and possibly boycotting them. And so I think the decision was made to, try to back out of this gracefully. And this is the excuse that they're going with. So whether or not this is good or bad, I don't know. To me personally, I thought the movie looked okay. Like I'd have probably caught it on video or something along those lines. I definitely wouldn't have seen it in the theater. But its profile has definitely been elevated, and in fact, there are probably more people interested in wanting to see this movie now than there were before all this controversy started. So what do you guys think about this? Would you want to see The Hunt? Do you think that it would have sucked anyway because of Damon Lindelof's involvement? Because I guarantee you, I think that it probably would have, but who knows? I'd have to reserve judgment until I saw it. Do you think there's more to Universal pulling the movie than meets the eye? Let me know in the comments, and as always, for all your movie, TV, and entertainment news and analysis, subscribe to my channel. This is Matthew Kadish. I'll catch you in the next video.